The cold evening air felt sharp against his skin as the teenager waited at the bus stop, shifting his weight from foot to foot. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows on the pavement. It had been a long day, and all he wanted was to get home, grab something to eat, and forget the world for a while. Then he saw her. An elderly woman, bundled in a thin coat, struggling with heavy grocery bags. She moved slowly, each step an effort, her frail hands trembling as she adjusted the weight of the bags. Her face was marked by time, deep lines of a life lived long and hard. Something about her caught his attention. Maybe it was the way she hesitated before taking another step. Maybe it was the silent struggle in her eyes, as if she wasn't just carrying groceries but something far heavier. He didn't think twice. Stepping forward, he reached out. "Let me help you with that." The woman's eyes snapped up to his, surprise flashing across her face. For a brief moment, she looked almost afraid, like she wasn't expecting anyone to notice her, let alone offer help. Then, slowly, her expression softened, and she nodded. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He took the bags, surprised at how heavy they were. "Where are you headed?" "Just down the road," she said, motioning towards a quiet, dimly lit street. As they walked, he noticed something odd. The air felt different, heavier somehow. The usual sounds of the city, cars in the distance, people chatting on sidewalks, seemed muffled. The woman walked with small, careful steps, as if she was weighing each movement, calculating each step. "Do you live alone?" he asked, trying to make conversation. A pause. Then, a quiet, "Yes." Something in her tone made him glance at her. There was loneliness there, but also something deeper, something she wasn't saying. They reached her house, a small, old-looking home that seemed frozen in time. The paint was peeling, the windows slightly fogged. It didn't look like a place that belonged in this part of the city. The woman turned to him. "You're very kind," she said, her voice carrying an odd weight. Not many people would have stopped. He shrugged. "It's no big deal." But the way she looked at him, it was as if she knew something he didn't. Then, as he was about to hand over the bags, something shifted. A faint hum filled the air, low, almost unnoticeable. The streetlights dimmed for a split second, like a breath being held. He frowned. "Did you hear that?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. "Would you like to come in for a moment?" A strange feeling washed over him. Something told him he shouldn't. But curiosity pulled him forward. As he stepped into the house, the door shut softly behind him, and the moment he crossed the threshold, everything changed. The air inside felt thicker, heavier, like stepping into a different world. Objects on the shelves seemed older than they should be, books with worn covers, clocks ticking a fraction too slow, a faint scent of something unfamiliar lingering in the air. And then, just for a second, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something move. But when he turned, nothing was there. Outside, unseen in the shadows, a figure watched the house. Waiting. The moment the door shut behind him, he felt it, a shift. The air inside the house felt dense, like stepping into a place frozen in time. The dim glow of old lamps cast long shadows on the wooden floor, making the space feel older than it should be. Everything, from the bookshelves to the faded wallpaper, felt like it belonged to a different era. The teenager hesitated, gripping the grocery bags a little tighter. Something about this place felt off. It wasn't just old, it was different. The elderly woman moved slowly, placing the bags on a worn wooden table. "Sit down," she said gently, gesturing toward a chair. He hesitated, glancing at the door. A part of him told him he should leave. But another part, the part that was curious, kept him rooted in place. "You have a lovely home," he said, trying to push away the unease. The woman chuckled, but there was something sad in the sound. "You're the first person to step inside in a very long time." That sentence alone sent a small shiver down his spine. She sat across from him, folding her hands on the table. "Not many people would have helped me today. Not many stopped to notice anymore." He gave a small shrug. It just felt right. She smiled at that, a faraway look in her eyes. "That's how it always starts." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, she stood up and walked toward a wooden cabinet in the corner of the room. She unlocked it. Something about the way she turned the key made him feel like whatever was inside was not meant to be seen by just anyone. She pulled out an old, leather-bound book and placed it gently on the table between them. The cover was etched with symbols, ones he didn't recognize. They almost seemed to move when the light flickered over them. "What is this?" he asked, staring at it. She exhaled slowly. "A record of things that most people have forgotten, or were made to forget." He frowned. "Made to forget?" She didn't respond right away. Instead, she slowly opened the book, flipping through pages filled with strange writings and old photographs, photographs that shouldn't exist. One in particular made his breath catch. It was her, the old woman, standing in a crowd of people who looked decades younger, yet she looked the exact same. His pulse spiked. This isn't possible. This picture must be edited or something." She didn't deny it. She didn't argue. She just watched him carefully. "What would you say if I told you I took that picture in 1952? He blinked. "I'd say that's impossible." "Would you?" She tilted her head. "Or would you wonder why the air felt different when you stepped in? Why my house feels like it belongs to another time?" His mouth went dry. I don't understand." She reached forward, placing a hand over the book. "That's because you haven't been told the truth." He swallowed hard. "And what truth is that?" She took a slow breath before speaking. "That the world you know, is only a fraction of what's really out there." A sharp chill ran down his spine. Something about the way she said it, it wasn't just words. It was a statement. A fact. And then, a sound. A soft knocking on the door. The woman's expression changed instantly. The warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by something colder, sharper, fearful. She turned to him, her voice suddenly urgent. "You need to hide. Now." His pulse hammered. "Why? Who is that?" The knock came again, this time harder. The woman's face was dead serious now. "Go. Now." Heart pounding, he scrambled up as she motioned toward a dark hallway. He barely had time to react before she opened the door just a crack. A voice spoke from outside. "We know he's here." A jolt of panic shot through his chest. Who were they? How did they know about him? He pressed himself against the wall, his breath shallow. He could hear the woman speaking in low, measured tones, but he couldn't make out the words. And then, something flickered in the air. A soft hum, the same one he'd heard outside before stepping into the house. Except this time, it was louder. And he wasn't sure if he was imagining it, but for a brief second, the walls seemed to shift. As if the entire house was breathing. Then, silence. The door closed. Footsteps retreated. The woman appeared in the hallway, her face unreadable. "You need to leave," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Now." He stared at her, his mind racing. Who were they? What's going on? She hesitated, then handed him something small and metallic, its surface covered in strange markings. "Take this. Keep it hidden. And no matter what, don't come back." He looked down at the object in his palm. It was warm to the touch. almost like it was alive. His heart was still racing as he gripped the strange object in his palm. The weight of it felt wrong, not because it was heavy, but because it felt like it shouldn't exist. It was smooth, metallic, yet warm, as if it had its own heartbeat. The old woman stood in the dim hallway, her expression grave. "You need to listen carefully," she whispered. "Once you walk out of this house, things will change. You can never come back here." His mind struggled to catch up. Just moments ago, he had been helping an old woman with groceries. Now, he was holding an object that felt alive, standing inside a house that didn't feel real, with strangers outside looking for him. "What's going on?" His voice came out more desperate than he intended. "Who were those people? Why do they know about me?" The woman hesitated, as if deciding whether to tell him the truth. Then, she stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was gentle, yet he felt a strange vibration pulse through him the moment she made contact. "You remind me of someone," she said softly. The way she said it sent a chill down his spine. She turned away, walking toward the wooden cabinet where she had pulled the strange book from earlier. This time, she opened a hidden compartment beneath the shelves, revealing a collection of old photographs and letters. She picked one up and handed it to him. He stared at the photograph, and felt his stomach drop. It was a picture of a young man standing in front of a small-town general store. But the young man wasn't just anyone. He looked exactly like him. Same height. Same build. Same eyes. Only the photograph was dated 1952. His breath caught. This is a joke, right?" The woman's face was unreadable. "No," his pulse thundered in his ears. "This can't be real. This guy, he looks exactly like me." She nodded slowly. "That's because it is you." He felt like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. "No," he shook his head. "That's impossible. I wasn't even born then. My parents weren't even born then." The woman's expression didn't change. "Not in the way you think." He looked down at the photograph again, his mind racing. And then he noticed something else. The object he was holding, the strange metallic piece she had given him, was in the photograph too. The man who looked like him was holding it in his hand. His chest tightened. "What is this?" he whispered. "Why am I in this picture?" The woman exhaled. "Because this has happened before." Before he could ask another question, the floorboards creaked. The woman's eyes snapped up toward the ceiling. He followed her gaze and froze. A shadow moved above them. Someone, or something, was inside the house. She grabbed his wrist. "You need to leave. Now." A sudden thump echoed from upstairs. His chest tightened with fear. "Who's up there?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pushed a small, wooden trapdoor at the side of the room, revealing a hidden tunnel beneath the floor. "Go," she whispered urgently. He hesitated. "What about you?" She gave a small, sad smile. "This is where I stay. But you have a choice." A loud crash from upstairs sent a jolt through his body. There was no more time to argue. He crawled into the tunnel, and as he looked back one last time, he saw the old woman standing at the edge of the opening. She raised a hand, and for a split second, the air around her shimmered. Like she was fading. Then, she reached up and closed the trapdoor. Darkness swallowed him whole. And just as it did, the object in his hand began to glow. The tunnel was cold and silent, except for the sound of his own shaky breaths. The dirt walls pressed in on either side, rough and uneven, like they hadn't been used in years. He crawled forward, the glowing object still clutched tightly in his palm. It pulsed with a faint, rhythmic hum, almost as if it were alive. He could barely see ahead, but there was no turning back now. Above him, muffled voices echoed through the house. A man's voice, calm, controlled, but carrying an edge of authority. "We know he's here." A long silence followed. Then, the woman's voice, steady but tinged with something heavy. "I don't know who you're talking about." Another voice, this one colder. "Lying won't change what's coming." He froze in place, his breath catching. Whoever they weren't just looking for him. They already knew. Knew what? His fingers tightened around the mysterious object, and as he did, something shifted around him. The tunnel walls shimmered, just for a second, as if the space around him wasn't stable. He blinked, his heart pounding. Was he imagining things? No. Something was happening. A sudden thud from above made him flinch. The sound of furniture being dragged, overturned, they were searching for him. He needed to move. Now. Forcing himself forward, he crawled faster, ignoring the dirt scraping against his hands. The tunnel stretched on longer than he expected, twisting beneath the house like some ancient passageway. How long had this been here? And more importantly, where did it lead? Then, a light ahead. A faint bluish glow, pulsing gently. As he neared the end of the tunnel, the dirt walls slowly transitioned into smooth metal. The change was so sudden, so unnatural, that he had to stop and press his hand against the cold surface. It felt alien. Not like something that belonged underground. His pulse quickened. What is this place? Before he could take another step, a voice whispered behind him. You shouldn't be here. His breath hitched. He spun around, but no one was there. Just darkness stretching back into the tunnel. A deep, unnatural silence filled the space, pressing against his ears. He turned back to the light, swallowing the fear crawling up his spine. He had two choices: stay here and risk whatever was behind him, or move forward. He stepped into the glow. And the moment he did, the world around him changed. The other side the passage opened into a massive underground chamber. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls were lined with tall, metallic structures, glowing with an eerie blue energy. Symbols, the same ones from the old woman's book, were etched across the surfaces, pulsing faintly as if they were alive. At the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, and on it, a second object. It was identical to the one in his hand. Another one? His heart pounded as he stepped closer. The moment his fingers brushed against it, the object in his palm reacted violently, glowing brighter, too bright. A deep vibration filled the air, and suddenly, the entire chamber shook. A massive pulse of energy shot outward, sending waves through the walls, the ground, everywhere. And then, the world flickered. Not like an earthquake. Not like a tremor. Like reality itself had been disturbed. He stumbled back, his mind racing. What just happened? A low mechanical sound hummed through the room, growing louder by the second. Then, from the farthest end of the chamber, something moved. A silhouette stepped forward. Not a person. Not human. A pair of glowing blue eyes locked onto him from the darkness. And then, a voice spoke, one that sent a chill through every nerve in his body. You were never supposed to come here. The glowing blue eyes locked onto him from the shadows, radiating an unnatural, piercing light. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't human. The figure stepped forward, emerging from the dim glow of the underground chamber. Its form was tall, impossibly smooth, and eerily humanoid, except for the thin lines of light running along its body, pulsing in sync with the object in his palm. A deep, mechanical hum filled the air. You were never supposed to find this place, the voice repeated, cold and measured. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. The teenager staggered backward, heart pounding. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet felt frozen, locked in place by the sheer impossibility of what he was seeing. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if analyzing him. Then, the walls around them began to shift. The symbols etched into the metallic surfaces flared with energy, sending waves of strange vibrations through the air. He could feel it in his bones, like something was rewriting itself. This wasn't just a chamber. It was alive. The object in his hand grew hot, the glow intensifying. His pulse quickened. Something was happening. A memory flashed through his mind, the old woman's voice, whispering urgently before he left. "No matter what, don't let go of it." The strange being took another step forward. Its voice was calm, but filled with something ominous. "Give it to me." The demand sent a bolt of terror through his chest. It wasn't asking. It was commanding. And somehow, he knew that if he gave up the object, he would never leave this place. His fingers tightened around it. No, the being's glowing eyes flared brighter. A deep vibration rolled through the chamber, and suddenly, the walls began closing in. Everything shifted at once. The chamber reacted to the creature's anger, the air itself growing thick with electrical energy. Symbols across the walls began twisting, changing, as if reality itself was rearranging. And then, a loud, echoing boom shook the entire structure. The teenager whipped around just in time to see a portion of the chamber's ceiling collapse inward, sending a cloud of dust and debris crashing down. In the chaos, the being's form flickered, distorted for just a second. That was his chance. He ran. The chase, his feet pounded against the metallic floor as he sprinted toward the only exit he could see, a narrow corridor leading into darkness. Behind him, the mechanical voice shifted, becoming something distorted and urgent. "Stop. You cannot leave." The chamber groaned, the walls pulsing like a living thing. Strange, blue energy veins snaked along the surfaces, reacting to the being's presence. His heart hammered. He wasn't fast enough. The air around him thickened, as if gravity itself was changing. He stumbled, his body growing heavier, as if some invisible force was dragging him down. Then, the object in his hand flared bright white. For a moment, the oppressive weight vanished, and his body became light, almost weightless. He launched forward, barely dodging as the corridor's walls shifted violently, trying to trap him inside. The structure was fighting back. Ahead, the tunnel split into two paths. One was dark, empty. The other had a faint glow, a glow that matched the object in his hand. He didn't have time to think. He sprinted toward the light. The escape the moment he stepped into the glowing tunnel, the air changed again. The hum of the strange underground structure faded into a deep silence. The oppressive pull on his body vanished. He kept running, his breath coming in sharp gasps, until he burst out into the open night. The cold air hit him like a slap, and for a moment, he just stood there, gulping in oxygen. He had made it out. He turned, expecting to see the tunnel entrance behind him. But there was nothing. No tunnel. No underground structure. Just an empty field, stretching out under the night sky. His mind reeled. He had just been inside something. An entire underground complex. And now, it was gone. Like it had never existed. The object in his palm pulsed softly, as if reassuring him that he hadn't imagined it. But before he could process what had happened, a voice rang out. "Over here." His stomach dropped. Turning quickly, he saw two shadowed figures approaching from the distance. They weren't strangers. They were the men from the old woman's house. The ones who had been looking for him. His heart slammed against his ribs. They had found him. One of them lifted something metallic, a device he had never seen before. A bright light shot toward him. And in the split second before it reached him, the world blinked out. Darkness. It felt like floating. A sensation too vast, too endless to be real. His mind struggled to grasp where he was, what had happened, but there was nothing. Then, a pulse. Not sound. Not sight. Just a feeling, like waking up without realizing you had been asleep. And then, light. Blinding, white, and overwhelming. His body jerked violently, like he had been dropped from a great height. Air rushed into his lungs, and suddenly, he was aware of his body again. The cold ground beneath him, the weight of his own limbs, the rapid pounding of his heartbeat. He gasped, coughing as reality crashed back in. He was somewhere new. A white, sterile-looking room, smooth metallic walls that pulsed with a soft blue glow, similar to the underground chamber he had just escaped from. Except this place felt controlled. He tried to move, but couldn't. Something held him in place. His arms and legs were strapped to a chair-like device, a faint hum vibrating through the material. Panic surged. What happened? The last thing he remembered, the men. The device. The light. And now, he was here. A movement in the corner of the room caught his attention. Someone was watching him. A man. Dressed in dark, unfamiliar clothing, his face unreadable. Not old, not young, but something about him seemed off. The man stepped forward, his expression calm. Too calm. You woke up faster than expected. The teenager struggled against the restraints. Who are you? Where am I? The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied him with cold curiosity, like a scientist examining an unknown specimen. Then, in a voice that sent chills down his spine, he said, "You already know the answer." A wave of fear rippled through him. "No," he said, shaking his head. "No, I don't." The man's lips curved slightly, but there was no warmth in it. "You are not the first," he said simply. The words hung heavy in the air. What does that mean?" The man turned slightly, motioning toward a wall. At his command, the smooth metallic surface shifted, transforming into a screen filled with images. Photographs. All of them, of him. Not just one. Dozens. Different places. Different times. Some in black and white. Some in color. His own face staring back at him from across the decades. A cold dread settled in his chest. This isn't real," he whispered. The man's gaze didn't waver. "It's very real." The teenager swallowed hard, his pulse hammering in his ears. I don't understand. How can I be in these pictures? I was never there." "You were." The man's tone was unervingly patient. "Or, more accurately, you have been. Many times before." His mind reeled. This was impossible. It was some kind of trick, some elaborate setup. It had to be. He forced himself to breathe, trying to grasp onto something, anything, that made sense. This doesn't make any sense." His voice was barely above a whisper. I'm just a normal guy. I was just helping some old woman with her groceries." The man's expression shifted slightly, the first sign of something resembling amusement. "Is that what you believe?" The teenager's breathing was shallow, uneven. Then, the man reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. The object. The same strange metallic artifact the old woman had given him. Except, this one looked older. More worn. Like it had been through this before. The man held it up. "This is a key." "A key to what?" he demanded, his voice shaking. The man's smile faded. "A key to something far older than this world. Something that was never meant to be found." The teenager stared at the object, his mind racing. "Then why did she give it to me?" The man's expression darkened. Because she was one of us. A sharp chill ran down his spine. What? The man finally met his eyes. You still don't get it, do you? He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. You are not living your first life. The words sent shockwaves through his entire body. What do you mean? You've been here before. In different places. In different times. You just don't remember. The teenager felt his entire world tilt. No. That wasn't possible. He was just a normal person. A normal person who had suddenly found himself in the middle of something impossible. His pulse hammered in his ears. You're lying. The man only watched him. Then, a door behind him slid open. Another figure stepped inside. A woman. She was younger than the old woman from the house, but something about her was startlingly familiar. The moment their eyes met, the teenager's breath caught. He knew her. Somehow, deep in his bones, he knew her. The woman studied him carefully. Then, she spoke, her voice soft, but filled with certainty. We don't have much time. If you want answers, you're going to have to trust me. The teenager swallowed hard, his mind spinning. And in that moment, he knew. Everything had changed. The air in the sterile metallic room felt heavy. Too heavy. The teenager could feel the weight of something unspoken pressing down on him. The woman, the one who looked familiar, yet completely unknown, stepped forward, her gaze locked onto his. We don't have much time. Her voice was urgent but calm, as if she had been through this before. The man beside her, the one who had shown him the photographs of himself across time, watched her carefully, like he was waiting to see what she would do next. The teenager's breath hitched. His mind was a storm of confusion, disbelief, and fear. He had just been walking home hours ago. He had just helped an old woman carry her groceries. And now he was here. A prisoner. A mystery. A mistake in time. He clenched his fists. I don't understand. The woman tilted her head slightly. No, you don't. She lifted her hand and revealed another metallic object, similar to the one he had been given, but different. It glowed softly in the dim light. This is proof, she said, stepping closer. He eyed the object. Proof of what? You think you're just a kid, living an ordinary life, she continued, her voice steady. But you're not. He shook his head. No. That's not possible. This is crazy. The man standing beside her finally spoke. Deny it all you want. It won't change the truth. His pulse pounded. What truth? The woman's expression softened, just a little. You've lived before, she said. Not once. Not twice. Hundreds of times. His stomach dropped. No. This wasn't real. This wasn't happening. That's impossible, he whispered. The woman sighed. That's what you said last time. The room seemed to tilt. His hands gripped the chair's armrests, his chest tightening. Last time? She turned toward the glowing screen on the wall and swiped her hand across it. The images shifted, revealing something new. A timeline. And on that timeline, his face. Dozens of pictures, dates spanning across centuries. 1862. 1924. 1952. 1987. 2009. 2024. Each one had a different location. A different moment in time. A different life. But the same face. His face. His vision blurred. He couldn't breathe. No. No, 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 this isn't real. The woman crouched in front of him, her gaze steady. You need to listen to me. His mind screamed for logic, for reason, but nothing about this made sense. And yet, deep inside, a part of him knew. Somewhere, in the depths of his being, this felt true. She took a breath, then said the words that changed everything. You're not supposed to be here. The weight of those words hit him like a thunderclap. What do you mean? His voice was barely a whisper. The woman glanced at the man beside her before answering. This cycle? It was supposed to end. He shook his head. I don't understand. You were never meant to wake up again. A truth too big to comprehend. The teenager stared at her, his heartbeat thundering in his chest. You're saying, I was supposed to die? She shook her head. Not die. Move on. Her gaze flickered toward the man standing next to her, as if deciding how much to tell him. This world? It's not what you think it is. It never was. The air in the room felt thicker. The walls seemed to pulse, just like the underground chamber. The teenager's hands clenched into fists. Then tell me. What is it? The woman exhaled. You are part of something bigger. Something that's been happening for a long, long time. He swallowed hard. She looked him in the eyes. You're not human in the way you think you are. His stomach dropped. What does that mean? She hesitated. You've lived in different bodies, in different times, but your consciousness is the same. Each time, your memories reset, you forget who you are. The teenager felt the blood drain from his face. But this time, she said, her voice growing urgent, something went wrong. The man beside her stepped forward. You remembered. The teenager froze. Something in his chest twisted painfully. Like a memory just out of reach. His voice cracked. The woman leaned in closer. And now, the people who built this cycle? They know. His breath hitched. Who? The man spoke this time. The ones who keep resetting you. The final warning. The air grew colder. The woman's voice was soft, but deadly serious. You need to understand, they're coming. The teenager felt his chest tighten. What? Who's coming? She stood up, glancing at the man. He gave her a small nod. Then, she turned back to the teenager and said, the ones who made you forget. The lights in the room flickered. And somewhere in the distance, a low alarm began to sound. The man stiffened. They found us. The woman grabbed his wrist. We have to go. Now. The teenager barely had time to process what was happening before the walls of the room began shifting, their smooth metallic surfaces changing, twisting. A door slid open. Beyond it, nothing but endless darkness. And then, just before stepping into the unknown, the woman turned back to him. And said something that sent a chill straight through his soul. This is your last chance to break free. The teenager swallowed hard. And then, he stepped into the dark. The moment the teenager stepped through the door, the world shifted. 1 second, he was in a sterile, metallic room with glowing walls. The next, he was falling. A void of absolute darkness swallowed him. No sound. No air. No sense of time or direction. Just falling. Then, light exploded around him. He hit the ground with a force that knocked the air from his lungs. The surface beneath him felt cold and smooth, like glass, but when he reached out to touch it, the material rippled like water. His chest heaved as he forced himself upright. Where was he? The woman and the man were nowhere to be seen. Instead, a vast endless horizon stretched before him, a sky filled with swirling, shifting colors, like a storm trapped in slow motion. Floating structures, buildings, machines, hung suspended in mid-air, their shapes constantly changing, as if they couldn't decide what they were supposed to be. A soft hum pulsed beneath him, steady and rhythmic. Then, a voice. Not the woman's. Not the man's. Something deeper. Something older. You have finally arrived. The teenager whipped around. A figure stood in the distance, cloaked in shadow and shifting light. He couldn't make out a face, but he could feel its presence pressing against his mind, against his very being. Who are you? His own voice felt small against the vastness of this place. The figure took a step forward, the space around it distorting slightly, as if the air itself was afraid to touch it. I am the architect. The teenager's stomach twisted. He didn't know how, but that name, it meant something. Something buried deep in his mind. Something he had forgotten. He swallowed hard. Where am I? The architect's voice was calm, patient, endless. You are at the edge of your existence. The place between what you were and what you could become. The teenager's fingers tightened into fists. This is real? The architect nodded. As real as anything you have ever known. A low vibration rippled through the air, a slow, steady pulse that made his bones ache. He felt the object in his palm grow warm, the strange key the old woman had given him. The architect's gaze fell on it. You still carry the fragment. The teenager looked down at it. What is this? The architect studied him for a moment. Then, it spoke words that changed everything. It is proof that you are the last one. The teenager's breath caught. The last, what? The architect took another step closer. The space around them dimmed, the shifting sky growing darker, as if the universe itself was waiting for the answer. The last anomaly. The last soul that has not yet been erased. A sharp, cold fear shot through his chest. Erased? The architect tilted its head. You were never meant to exist beyond the cycle. The teenager's pulse thundered. The cycle? You mean, my past lives? Yes. He felt like he couldn't breathe. I don't understand. If I've lived before, why don't I remember? Because we do not let you. A sharp chill ran down his spine. He took a step back. You're the one resetting me. The architect nodded slowly. It is necessary. The teenager's mind spun. Why? Why do you keep erasing me? The architect's glowing eyes flickered. Because you are not like the others. Silence crashed between them. The teenager stared, his mind racing. What do you mean? The architect lifted a hand, and the sky above them shifted. A massive, swirling mass of light and memory formed above them, thousands, millions of lives playing out all at once. He saw flashes, faces, places, entire civilizations rising and falling. But in each one, he was there. Sometimes as a scientist. Sometimes as a soldier. Sometimes as a simple man in a quiet town. But always him. You have lived among them for centuries, the architect said. You have walked their worlds, played their roles. But you were never one of them. His heart pounded. Then what am I? The architect's voice was softer now, almost sad. You are the last of something forgotten. Something that was meant to be erased long ago. The weight of those words hit him like a collapsing star. His whole body felt cold. I don't believe you. The architect studied him for a moment, then extended a hand. Then see for yourself. The teenager hesitated. Somewhere deep inside, he already knew the truth. If he took the architect's hand, he would remember. Everything. But if he did, there would be no going back. His fingers trembled. Then, he reached out. And the moment his skin made contact, reality shattered. The past. The truth. The beginning of everything, it all came rushing back. And for the first time in countless lifetimes, he remembered. The moment his hand touched the architect's, everything shattered. It wasn't like remembering a lost memory. It was like drowning in a tidal wave of truth, 1,000 lives, 1,000 moments, all crashing down on him at once. He saw himself across time, across civilizations, across galaxies. He saw a world before humanity, before Earth, before the stars as he knew them. And then, he saw the beginning. The first life he was not born. He was created. Not by a mother. Not by fate. By them. The architects, the beings who controlled the cycle, who shaped reality itself. They had designed him long before humans existed, a being meant to observe, to record, to learn. A watcher, not a participant. A ghost moving through history, unseen, unnoticed. But something had gone wrong. Somewhere in one of his lives, he had changed. He had stopped observing. He had started feeling. He had lived not as an outsider, but as one of them. And that was never supposed to happen. So they reset him. Again. And again. Each time, erasing his memories, placing him back into the cycle. Each time, hoping he would return to his original purpose. But each time, he found his way back to humanity. Because something inside him had broken free. And they couldn't erase it. The final choice, the vision ended as suddenly as it had begun. The architect stood before him once more, its glowing eyes unreadable. "You were the first," it said softly. "And now, you are the last." The teenager's hands shook. He knew. He understood now. All the strange feelings he had, the way he had felt different his entire life, it was because he wasn't human. Not entirely. But he wasn't one of them either. He was something else. Something they didn't control anymore. He took a slow breath, his mind settling into clarity. The architect watched him. "Now you understand why we must erase you." The teenager's pulse steadied. For the first time since this had begun, he wasn't afraid. "No." The architect tilted its head. "No?" His grip tightened around the object in his hand, the key the old woman had given him. She had known this would happen. She had prepared him. Because she had been one of them. And yet, she had chosen to help him. She had given him the only tool that could set him free. His eyes locked onto the architect's glowing gaze. "I'm not going to let you erase me again." The architect's voice was calm, but there was something new in it. Something unsettled. "You cannot escape what you are." The teenager smiled. "I already have." And then, he broke the key in half. The end of the cycle. The moment the object snapped, the entire world trembled. The glowing structures, the floating symbols, the shifting sky, all of it began unraveling. Because the key wasn't just a tool. It was the last piece of their control. The architects had designed him to never escape. But they had also given him the means to fight back. And now, he had broken their hold forever. The architect took a step back, its form flickering. The teenager felt it before he saw it. A rush of warmth. Clarity. Freedom. The world around him began to collapse, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid. He was free. And this time, they couldn't bring him back. A final wave of light engulfed him, and then, a new beginning. His eyes snapped open. He was standing on a city sidewalk. The sun was shining. The sounds of cars and voices filled the air. No sterile room. No architects. Just life. He looked down at his hands, normal. Human. But inside, he knew. He was still himself. This was no longer their game. He had broken the cycle. He had won. And for the first time in lifetimes, he had a future of his own making. As he took a deep breath, a voice echoed in his mind, the old woman's voice. Live well. This time, it's truly yours. He smiled. And walked forward, toward a life that was finally his own.